All right, let's go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. I'm Jackie Dolce, the Senior Manager of Government Affairs at the Grand Rapids Chamber, and I'd like to welcome you to today's virtual town hall on ESTA compliance for small business. We've actually designed this session for both small businesses facing compliance for the first time on October 1st and for employers who are already covered but may need a refresher. Our objective today is to provide your business with clear, actionable strategies for ESTA compliance and implementation. Before we get started, I want to thank our government affairs sponsors, Amway, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan, Comcast, and Roman Manufacturing, for investing in the work that we do and making events like this possible. We are fortunate to be joined today by two human resource professionals from HR Collaborative who are true subject matter experts when it comes to ESTA. Marcy McMahon is the Director of Client Services at HR Collaborative and brings over 25 years of experience helping organizations align people strategies with business outcomes. And Lauren Stielstra is also with us. She's an HR generalist at HR Collaborative, backed by more than 8 years of experience and a foundation in customer service. She specializes in creating seamless employee experiences that support retention, compliance, and culture. They're going to walk us through today how to implement and interpret ESTA rules and how they apply to your business. They'll talk about steps to update policies and effectively communicate changes to employees, and how to avoid some common compliance mistakes and penalties. A quick note before we begin. If you have general questions, please type them into the chat and we'll get to them in the Q&A portion. Marcy and Lauren won't be able to address organization-specific advice in this format, but their contact information will be made available for any follow-up conversations you'd like to have. And finally, the session is being recorded. A link to the recording, their presentation slides, updated Leo FAQs, and additional resources will be shared with all registrants later today. With that, I am excited to get started. Marcy and Lauren, thank you so much for being here, and I'm going to hand it over to you.
Oh, it's wonderful. Thank you, Jackie, for the introduction and for welcoming us today to this webinar. Just to share a little bit about HR Collaborative. We are a West Michigan-based company with national reach, fueled by a community of fractional HR professionals. As your flexible HR partner, we provide expert consultation, strategic support, and customizable solutions, from building agile HR systems to handling projects, placements, and ongoing coverage, all with an innovative approach that delivers dynamic results. And there's more to our story. When you partner with us, you're also investing in something bigger. Connexus Group is a family of nonprofit organizations with a shared mission, strengthening Michigan's workforce, businesses, and communities. HR Collaborative, as a subsidiary of Connexus, contributes to the work of nonprofits like Youth Solutions, Michigan Works, Market One, and Manufacturing Growth Alliance. Together, we create an ecosystem that supports youth, strengthens Michigan's economy, and makes it a great place to live, work, and do business. So let's get ready to dive into our topic. We'll begin today by answering a key question. What is ESTA and how does it apply to your business? From there, we'll shift into the small business application, go over some specific policies you might want to consider, share some lessons from the road, give you some compliance tips specifically for employers, and even share with you how to tailor your communication and training, and of course, follow up with all your questions. As a note, Lauren and I are not attorneys. Your policies should be reviewed by your retained attorney or your board. So let's go ahead and dive right into our first topic. What is ESTA?
Thanks for being here today, everyone. Again, we will do our best to give you the best content possible and to answer all your questions. We'll start with a brief overview of the Earned Sick Time Act to bring us up to date. The original Earned Sick Time Act of 2018 required certain employers to offer earned sick time and prohibited retaliation. Fast forward to July 2024, the Michigan Supreme Court invalidated the amended Paid Medical Leave Act and reinstated the original Earned Sick Time Leave. In regards to ESTA, large businesses are considered any employees or employers, with 11 plus employees, and small businesses are considered 1 to 10 employees. Once an employer employs 11 or more employees for 20 or more work weeks in the calendar year, the employer is no longer a small business. What makes an employee eligible for ESTA? All W-2 employees are included, meaning full-time, part-time, temporary, seasonal, and owners who are W-2 employees are all included in the count. Independent contractors are not included in the count and are not eligible for ESTA, as well as on-call or per diem employees who control their own schedule. Large businesses were effective February 21st of 2025, and small businesses are effective upcoming on October 1st of 2025. There is a delayed effective date for employers who had no employees before or on February 21st of 2022. In their case, they do not need to comply until 3 years after they employed their first employee. For example, if your first employee was employed October 2024, you would not need to comply with ESTA for them until October of 2027. One of the methods for administrating ESTA is by accrual. The accrual rate equals 1 hour of earned sick time per 30 hours worked. For hourly employees, sick time will accrue as hours are worked. For salary employees, the assumption is that 40 hours are worked per week, but if that's not the case, it will be based on the individual schedule. Small businesses, again, meaning under 10 employees, must allow up to 40 hours of paid leave, plus the option of the employer to offer 32 hours of unpaid leave. And large businesses must allow up to 72 hours of paid leave per year. Employers may also allow more at their discretion. An employee may use earned sick time leave as it's accrued regardless of the pay period. Once those 30 hours have been worked, the employee can use 1 hour of leave. Up to 40 unused hours can be carried over for small businesses, and large businesses can allow up to 72 of unused hours to be carried over as well. Usage caps still apply year to year, so meaning if you carry over 10 hours from year to year, you aren't allowed 82 hours or 40 in the small business case. You still are capped at the 72 and 40 hours. It would just be available to you sooner. Employers using the accrual can require new hires to wait up to 120 days before using leave.
So I'd like to talk about the front-loading method. In this type of method, employers may choose to exercise the option of applying the entire ESTA amount either on the first day of the plan year or the first day of the calendar year or the first day of employment. This allotment is, as Lauren said, for small businesses of under 10 employees, the allotment would be 40 hours, and large businesses, the allotment would be 72 hours. Some benefits of choosing this method are that there is no carryover amount. Hours do not carry over from 1 year to the next. You are also not obligated to track the accrual since the entire benefit is being provided up front. One important stipulation to keep in mind is the hours must be made available for immediate use by the employee. You cannot implement a waiting period for new hires, for example.
Now that we know how leave is earned, how is it implemented? For notice requirements, if the employee is leaving for foreseeable leave, the employer may require up to 7 days of advance notice. This would be in a situation where you have a doctor's appointment coming up, you've had that scheduled all year, your employer will want to know 7 days in advance to going out on that leave. However, a lot of things happen that are not foreseen. Those are not required a 7 days notice. It's just a notice as soon as possible. If you get into a car accident, no one's expecting you to be able to see into the future and have that leave scheduled. Just let your supervisor know as soon as possible. The employer should also not require the employee to secure their replacement. They are not, they do not have to reach out and find someone to take over their work or take over their hours, if they're using the sick leave. For documentation, employers may require reasonable documentation for absences over 3 consecutive days. The employee does have 15 days to provide the document requested. If that document costs money, the employer must cover the cost of that document. Sometimes that's not the case if it's just from a medical provider. Just having that after summary that doesn't cost any money. However, if it's something maybe more legal, then that might be something that requires a cost. The employer cannot delay the commencement of the employee going out on leave though, while they're waiting for that time. So you cannot wait 15 days to allow them to go out on that leave. You just have to kind of retroact it back. And usage increments are a minimum of 1 hour or smallest increment used by the employer. That is not on the time clock. You may have a time clock that you use to clock in and out. That could be by the minute, that could be every 5 minutes. That's not exactly what we're talking about here. We're talking about if you use accrual for PTO, are you allowed to use it in half-hour increments? Are you allowed to use it in 15-minute increments? That is how this is being planned out. Paid leave is at the higher of the employee's base wage or minimum wage, excluding premiums, tips, or commission. Employers using the front-loading method are not required to pay out or roll over unused sick time, but the employers using the accrual method do have the choice to either pay out or roll over unused sick time. Rehired employees within 2 months retain accrued time unless the employer elected to pay out the remaining unused sick time at the time of termination.
So now let's talk about some lessons learned in the road of ESTA in the real world. So one thing that we have learned is that you can actually apply different approaches for different classifications of employees in the same organization. For example, let's say you have full-time employees and you'd like to provide them the front-loading system. So in that case, you're giving them all the ESTA up front. They can use it day one, but you have the benefit of not having to track their accruals or their usage and not having to roll anything over. However, you may also have in your organization some casual status employees that work very part-time. In this case, you may want to exercise the accrual method, which provides you the benefit of having them use it only as it's accrued and even imposing a waiting period for new hires of up to 120 days. The difference on the other end, of course, is that you do have rollover, which is absolutely required unless you choose to pay out instead of rolling. That rollover, however, remember, there's a cap to the usage. No matter how much rolls over, the small business only has to allow the use of 40 hours annually, and the large business only has to allow the use of 72 hours annually. So this is a great example of how you can tailor your application of ESTA to suit your different classifications of employees. Another interesting way that we have learned that you can tailor your application of ESTA is that you can actually switch from one application method to another partway through the employee life cycle. Here's an example of how that might work. Let's say you're an organization that does typically have a waiting period for new employees to access PTO, and you'd like to have a waiting period also imposed for ESTA. Well, that means you must choose the accrual method because you cannot have a waiting period for front load. But you'd like to also enjoy the benefit of not having to track accrual or roll anything over. Can you have the best of both worlds? The answer is yes. You can start your new hires on the accrual method. And once you've gone through the waiting period you've selected up to 120 days, you can then switch to the front load method. So those new employees cannot access their accrued time. It does accrue, it is there, but they can't access until the end of the waiting period. Once the waiting period's over, you're now in the front load application where you have no rollover and no tracking of accrual. So that's a these are a couple of ways that we have learned that you can be very compliant with ESTA and still tailor it to unique business needs. Lauren's got a couple of examples also to share.
Likely already have other policies in place for your company and employees in your handbook, or just other policies that you have them sign when they start onboarding. It's important that you review those existing ones while implementing ESTA, as to not have any language that violates it elsewhere. For example, in your attendance policy, if you have a point system for absences, that could contradict what is allowed under ESTA for having that time off. Our advice is simply to do a full audit of your handbook and your policies that you currently have while implementing this. You never know what something will come up, and you don't want to have it in writing later for an employee to say, well, this shows one way, this shows the other. You want everything to be in full symmetry.
Yes.
And then down to practice agility with structural changes. Some of you may already have PTO or sick policies that encompass what ESTA is trying to provide. In circumstances that have already come up this year, I've assisted companies in rounding out their PTO policy to include the new ESTA changes instead of having your PTO policy and then having a separate ESTA bucket as well. To create more agility within the policies, we took the hard work that already went into creating the language and leave models and incorporated the rules of ESTA. The current PTO design may be used as so long as it provides the same level of benefits, used for the same purposes, and is accrued at the rate equal or greater, the same as ESTA. You do not need to fully recreate the wheel, but you do need to make sure that you are implementing the benefits that ESTA is now providing. Just for example, making sure that they are allowed to use it to go to doctor's appointments and go to children's school visits if they have an appointment that they need to make with the teacher. Those are things that you now need to be allowed that maybe weren't in the past. Just to round out the subject of this, make sure that you have your retained attorney or board members approve the changes before you implement them, just to make sure that how you have your policies written are in compliance. Now on to some tips for employers, which I'm sure most of you are here for. First and foremost, update your policy to align with ESTA. Whether that is a new policy or an amendment of a current sick time or PTO policy, make sure that you are getting that policy into your employees' hands. You want to choose the accrual or front load method based on administrative and financial preference. Like Marcy was saying, you can have it one way in the beginning and then change it to really align with what you want to work for your business. If you already have a waiting period in place, you can keep that, you just might have to flex a little bit. Implement reliable tracking systems if using the accrual method. If you don't use a system for payroll tracking or PTO tracking, you will need to do this manually. That is one thing to really remember to do. You want to make sure that you are tracking the accrual of it and the leave use as well. Post required notices in English, Spanish, and applicable languages. There is an example to the right. This is located on the Michigan Labor website. Train managers and HR on notice, documentation, and non-retaliation rules. They will need to be able to speak to the policy and how the company has implemented it if employees ask. I think it's probably pretty obvious that HR will need to know this, but the middle managers need to as well. So if their employees come up and have questions on it, or if they're in charge of approving the leave, they need to make sure to know what's allowed, what's not allowed under it. And then finally, keep clear records. You need to keep all records for 3 years of how the leave hours were used, because if you were to be audited by the wage and hour division, you would want them to be able to be supplied immediately. I don't want to scare everyone. I'm not saying that they're going around and we're seeing a bunch of that, but you do want to make sure you have those records, just like you do with tax records. So make sure to keep them for 3 years at least.
All right, so as you're thinking about your administrative implementation of ESTA in your organization or managing that administration, if you've already implemented, it's so important to also consider how will you communicate and train your workforce on ESTA. So we've broken this down to 3 phases of information sharing or communication, and then some reference tools and some recommendations for training. So to begin with, the leadership team and the consulted decision makers, this would take place in the pre-implementation phase, about 2 to 4 weeks before your effective date. The goal here is alignment and confidence. For the leadership team, this means holding a one-time strategy session, an executive briefing, either in person or virtual, that gives decision makers a clear overview of ESTA, the organizational impact, the compliance risks, and the strategic approach. They need to know if you're doing front loading or you're doing accrual. They don't need to be deep in the weeds, but they do need to have at least a good understanding of what we're doing and how we're doing it. The next would be the middle managers and stakeholders. And I would do that at least 2 weeks ahead. This is going to be deeper. You're going to want to offer more hands-on support to this group of people. They're going to be fielding a lot of questions and managing a lot of the administration of ESTA. So weekly training sessions, management workshops, webinars, and management-specific FAQs will give them the tools they need. We want to go over things like administrative procedures, escalation protocols, and give them a forum to ask questions. This layered approach will ensure that by the time you roll out ESTA to the employee group, both leaders and managers are prepared to communicate confidently and consistently. Okay, so now when launch week arrives, the focus is on reaching every employee with clear, accessible information and making sure the right tools are in place to support them. The objective is to inform the employee and activate resources. For employees, communication should be timely and consistent. I recommend that you start with a rollout email and then follow it up about just a few days later with a reminder about the rollout. Use multiple channels to ensure broad reach. A company-wide email will offer clarity. A virtual town hall or team huddles will give the interaction and engagement you need. And posters or infographics put up in common spaces to keep the message visible. It's important that the message remain simple. You want to give an explanation of rights, how they can access their benefits, and exactly where to go for more information. It is important to have your reference tools available and ready day one. They will be looking for these tools. So update and upload your updated policy to your SharePoint or into your handbook. Provide those printable one-pagers and infographics so employees can access some quick guidance at any time. By combining strong communication and practical reference tools, employees will not only hear the message, but have what they need to act upon it right away. So after the rollout, the work is still not finished. So this phase is about keeping the message alive. The objective in post-implementation is to reinforce knowledge, monitor the compliance, and sustain clarity. For managers, that probably means maybe a quarterly refresher. For the employees, you want to build ESTA into the rhythm of the year. Semi-annual reminders to keep it top of mind, and it should be introduced as well during new hire onboarding so that new hires know their rights from day one. Finally, don't forget about the reference tools. These do require continuous maintenance. As Lauren pointed out, changes will occur. So we'll want to make sure that your SharePoint, your handbook, and also any postings that you've put up, that they're refreshed, and at least annually, but also whenever the regulations change. Make sure that you have the latest policy language, the up-to-date HR contact information, and very easy to follow flow charts. This will simplify things for your team and also for your management team and your HR team. So we've developed some tools to help you. Lauren mentioned earlier the importance and the requirement actually to track accrual and to track usage if you're using the accrual method. If you don't have a payroll system or a timekeeping system that will do that work for you, we have a tool that we've developed to do it manually. So we will put links to these, and Jackie's going to send these out to you. If you like these, please feel free to use them. They're actually customizable, so you can put your own logo on there if you like. We've also put together a phased communication guide based on what we were just talking about with communication and training. So that would be a helpful tool for you also to use. So this concludes the information portion, which we've kept deliberately brief to leave time for question and answer. So if we are ready for some questions from the chat, Lauren and I will do our best to field those.
Well, thank you, Marcy and Lauren, for that overview and for walking us through all of these updates. Like Marcy said, we'd now like to open it up for questions from the audience. If you haven't already, please enter your question into the chat, and we'll do our best to get it through as many of them as possible in the time that we have. As a reminder, some questions may need to be handled offline, but we'll make sure you have the contact information you need so you can follow up directly. Let's see here. Do we have anything in the chat right now? Okay. Let's take a look. The first question is tracking the accrual and payouts in QB payroll enough? Or do we need HR notes on file documenting communication on usage?
All that is required for compliance is the tracking. It's important to have your tracking documented and saved in the event of any audit.
And it sounds like the second half of that question, maybe with the communication, if you mean like the communication of the implementation of what it is, I mean, it's very important to have that in writing, I would say. And when when it was handed out to employees, but if you mean what they were specifically using it for, if that payroll system doesn't have a spot for you to write those details out, it might be smart to, when you're, kind of having those reports pulled, to maybe have a spot where you can write a note, and just detail it to explain the doctor's appointment. It doesn't have to be anything super detailed, but just a brief memo to just also to remind yourself of what it was used for.
They followed up with, I currently give my employees 3 weeks vacation. Can I change the vacation time to PTO and be in compliance?
You can combine your current PTO policy and your ESTA policy in the same envelope as long as the provision at least meets or possibly exceeds the ESTA requirements.
In the policy itself, when you're writing that out, you will want to make sure to have some verbiage in there that this does encompass ESTA, and that 72 or 40, depending on the size of the business, is for these reasons specifically. Just because those do, and I don't know exactly this person's PTO or vacation policy, how flexible it is, but sometimes people have certain reasons that you can use it by. Some people have a certain time that you have to request it by for it to be approved. And with ESTA, as we learned, that's not always the case. You can use it pretty much on hand if needed. So it just has to make sure that the verbiage is changed if it doesn't already explain that you have the flexibility of the rules that are in ESTA.
And I think this is a good reinforcement of having your policy reviewed by your attorney or your board, because it is complicated and people interpret things a certain way, and you want to make sure it's as clear as humanly possible.
Good. One more part. It says, if we already have a bank available beyond the minimum 40 hours for small business, does it have to be named ESTA?
No, you do not have to name it ESTA, but as Lauren mentioned, it would be wise to include in the policy that does describe this, that you say that this policy meets or exceeds the requirements of the Earned Sick Time Act, so that people are not saying, my employer doesn't do ESTA. That's not true. You're doing ESTA, you're just doing it in the same envelope.
Good. Next question. If the only employee currently in the S Corp owner is the S Corp owner, and they hire a new employee, does the 3-year grace period apply? Or since they are an employee, even though they are the owner, Will that not apply if they hire their first true employee?
So it sounds like this person, the owner is a W-2 employee. If they are considered that first employee, even though they're the owner and they're the only one. If they are W-2, they are getting a W-2 salary of some sort. They are considered an employee. So the second person would actually be a second employee. But just for the sake of, for anyone else who has questions, let's say that person is not, they just received their K-1, it's just profit-based, they're not W-2. This person comes on, this is their first W-2 employee, that would have the delayed effect.
Good. Any lessons that you can provide us on what you've learned, or examples of any challenges, successes, or failures? Anything stick out to you?
One of the most important pieces in my experience in implementing ESTA, and the organization I'm thinking of did use two different styles and the changeover from accrual to front loading. And one thing that was really critical was stressing to the staff that we are here for you. This is a benefit for you, and we want you to use it and exercise it. So when it's clunky and you have questions, just know we're here to make this work better for you. So please bring your questions. We expect some clunkiness. We're new too. So bring forward your questions. That'll help us all to do a better job. And that really diffused a lot of concerns. It built a lot of confidence in the HR department and the leadership as well. So, and it was clunky. And because ESTA is new to all of us. So when things came out clunky and people said, well, I don't feel like I'm seeing my ESTA in my bucket, I'm not sure how it works, they knew that we were expecting that. So I think just give yourself some room to grow into ESTA and offer that to your staff. Be very transparent with them. It's going to see you through and build a lot of confidence and trust.
Next question says, once again, what is the maximum amount of ESTA time that can be used in a year?
For businesses that have 11 or more employees, it's 72 hours. And for businesses with 10 or fewer employees, it is 40 hours per year.
And I think I want to expand on this a little bit, because after you leave this call, I think you're going to think of this. So a full-time employee might work more than 40 hours, right? And they're accruing an hour for every 30 hours worked, but they maybe work overtime. So let's say they average 55 hours a week or 60 hours a week. They're going to accrue more time. And you do have to make sure that that accrual is happening. And if you're doing it manually, you need to track based on actual hours worked. And that has to go in their bank, but they're still limited. So if there's a large employer, 11 or more employees, it's still limited to 72 hours. There could be 100 in there, but they can only use 72. And then if they roll more the next year, there could be who knows how many hours, but they can still only use 72. And if it's a small employer, 10 or under, they can only use 40, no matter what's in that bank. So you do have to have the right accrual in there. You absolutely have to track it. But you can limit the use.
Next question. The 3-year grace period that was mentioned, does that only apply to new business? Could you repeat that part?
That's a good question.
Let me just, if I know, so I'm super clear too. I was clear before. Okay. So if the delayed effective date for employers who had no employees before or on February 21st of 2022. So anyone past that, so I mean, obviously it's 2025 now, this is not an applicable change anymore. This was for anyone who was maybe just getting their first employee and this was being rolled out immediately. So if today, back to the example before, so someone, they own their business, they are getting their first employee today, they do need to comply as of today, or as of October 1st if it's small, as of today, February 21st of this year. For a large, This is for anyone who was before or on February 21st of 2022.
Next question. If you front load, do you have to load 40 hours? If part-timers work 20 hours a week, is 20 hours acceptable?
No, you have to load 40 hours. Is the accrual amount is 1 hour per every 30 worked.
We found that front loading has led to a lot of misuse, last minute call outs, and expense increases for absence coverage. Do you know if we could do a quarterly front load, like 20 hours granted at the beginning of each quarter, so the bank grows more gradually, or does that come too close to accrual?
I think that is going to come too close to accrual. I don't think that that would be compliant. I do understand the issues when you front load and you want to have them adhere to the letter of the rule as far as its actual usage. If that's important and you have to have it used only for those purposes, you're just going to end up, I think, with a lot of that sorting through what's the real use and what's my documentation. It is not a terrible question to ask yourself. Would you be willing to just let them use it? And that sometimes is a strong argument for combining your regular PTO and your ESTA into the same envelope and say, you know what, it's front loaded, it's yours, use it as you wish. When it's gone, nothing rolls. So a simplified approach, you should do the math and see, can that work for your organization?
Next question asks, I'm a little unclear on the relationship between PTO and ESTA. Could you go over that part again?
Yeah, so I guess the thing to really remember is that I feel like I keep harping on the fact that you can put them together. They don't have to be together. I have seen it with companies where they have very clear, this is your vacation time and this is your ESTA, your earned sick time. They don't have to be meshed together. I think what some employers have found is it's a little bit easier for the employee to wrap their head around how the time works if they're wrapped together. However, they don't have to be. You could have your vacation or PTO policy separate from the ESTA. If you put them together, I think the thing that we just really are harping on is to make sure it's very clear in there that this encompasses ESTA. So let's just say PTO, it's accrual based already. You accrue at a certain rate. At the end of the year, you have, let's say, like 25 days or something. Within that time, obviously, that exceeds what ESTA is asking of you to offer these employees. They are accruing, it's at a rate that is equal to ESTA, which is the 1 hour for every 30 hours worked or higher. A lot of times, employers are already having these systems rolled out that are richer than what ESTA is asking. So you don't have to change what you're doing. You just need to really spell out in the policy itself, in the written policy, that what we have encompasses ESTA. You are allowed to use it for the reasons of ESTA. So a family member is sick, a family member needs me to go to their school, I'm sick, I have a doctor's appointment. You to make sure that they know when they can use it, that they are getting it at a rate that is equal or higher than what ESTA requires, and that also they just know that it is wrapped in there. Like she said, you don't want the employees to be going around and being like, well, we don't get ESTA. We have PTO, but we don't get ESTA. You want it very clear in there that they have that time that is used for this. They already probably had time that they could do for use that for that. I haven't found a ton of companies yet, and that doesn't mean they're not out there, that this is an entirely new thing to them and that they never got time before. And so now all of a sudden they have all this time that they can use. Usually they already had something in place. This is just now kind of a subsection of it. If I didn't explain that well, please please retype in there and I'll try to kind of word it differently again.
All right. Next question. If accrual is used and over 3 years, 50 hours roll over, would this need to be paid off if the employee is fired or decides to leave?
That's a good question. The answer is no. There is no required payout of ESTA. However, if the employee were to be rehired within 2 months, all of that ESTA would automatically be grandfathered, I guess, into their account. So that ESTA would show back up if they get rehired within 2 months of separation.
For new employees, uh, the use of ESTA can be restricted up to 120 days, but it accrual is still happening during that time period, correct?
Correct. Yep, they are still accruing during that time. They just can't use that time quite yet.
Okay. Um, are you aware of any employee lawsuits since the February start for large employers? We all love a legal precedent, but don't want to be the one involved. Haha.
Right.
Yes. Personally, no. Am I sure that there are ones out there? Yes. Have you?
I'm looking them up right now.
There we go. Personally, I have not.
Yeah.
We have not heard of any that have clients that we have
Right.
dealt with.
No organizations that I've been working with or were affiliated with have had any issues with it. But there have been a couple. So in 2025, there was one in Michigan. I looked up only Michigan. And the argument was that the Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity, LEO, misinterpreted ESTA and applied it to collective bargaining agreements. So that's not really related to many of us here. Then there was another one that challenged Michigan legislature's process of adopting and amending. And those are the only ones that I'm aware of. So they're not really any suits brought against an organization for mishandling this new rule.
Next question asks, do they have to accrue from day one of employment? Does accrual start day one?
Yes.
100%. But again,
Um,
if you're using the accrual method, you can impose a waiting period. It's all accruing in the background. It's just not accessible until the end of your waiting period, which can be as long as 120 days, which is very long.
Okay. Um, Next question asks, do all states have ESTA?
They do not. Some have ESTA, some have different hours though. Specifically because I was dealing with this yesterday, Arizona's for large businesses is 40 and for small businesses is only 24 hours. So they do have variations in the time increments. And then some states don't have ESTA per se, but they have some sort of paid leave that they go towards. But there are some states that have nothing. So it really does, it is a true state by state case.
Okay. I think that's the last question that we have from the chat. Is there anything else, Marcy or Lauren, that you can think that our listeners, our viewers should know?
I just think if you're a small business, this is looming. So I would just suggest, head down, work, get this thing ready because you want to be as prepared as possible. No matter how you prepare, there's going to be a few surprises, but you can minimize the agony by getting ready in advance as much as humanly possible. Communicate, 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 have your tools ready. Get your policy in order as quickly as possible and get it in front of your attorney or in front of your board to make sure that it lines up. Everything you could do in advance is just going to be a huge favor you've done for yourself, would be my recommendation.
I think my last thing, and I think this is just me partially making sure from that question about the PTO and the ESTA policies, like how those relationships work. I think the number one thing we want to take away is, or to have you take away, and just also what you just said, is to make sure that you have a policy in writing and it's very clear in there that you are abiding by ESTA. I think that the thing that I really just want to make sure that everyone knows is to that you need to have it down on paper. You need to give that to the employees. They have the in front of them showing that they are getting this now. And that if they have questions, you're able to answer and be like, yep, I think we just want to make sure that people are as prepared as possible. If that means too that you, like on the screen, if you have questions and you need to email us, that we can absolutely answer emails and answer questions about your specific company and what that looks like together. Can we rewrite an entire ESTA handbook policy for you? That will probably need to go through sales. But we can absolutely answer questions if you have questions about specifically your policy.
Yes.
Because I know everyone's is different. Everyone has different PTO and vacation policies. Some people might have them. Some people might have just a sick time already. It varies throughout the companies. We do want to make sure that you feel comfortable with what you're doing moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say if you feel like you need a little bit more support, you've got a few more questions about ESTA or something that you didn't put in the chat because it was really pertaining to a real situation in your organization. Of course, you don't want to air that in the chat. We're here for you. Reach out. Our information's on the screen. Or if you have any other HR concerns or questions, ideas, initiatives you'd like to launch, we're here for that purpose. We are HR Collaborative, here to make work better. So use our information, reach out to us.
Well, thank you again, Marcy and Lauren, for sharing your insights and your practical advice on ESTA compliance and implementation. As I mentioned earlier, we'll be sending out a follow-up email later today with the recording of today's session, the presentation slides, updated resources from Leo, including the FAQs, and some resources provided from HR Collaborative as well. And once again, a huge thank you to our government affairs sponsors, Amway, Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Michigan, Comcast, and Roman Manufacturing for supporting this work. Thank you all for joining us this morning. We hope this session helps you feel more confident in navigating ESTA. Please reach out to HR Collaborative or to the Grand Rapids Chamber if you need more assistance or more help. Have a great rest of your day and enjoy your weekend.